Hi, I'm Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of Regulator. Welcome to this week's Regulatory Roundup. This week, there were 481 alerts from 270 unique U.S. regulators, and 370 had to do with coronavirus. The regulator of the week was the CFTC. Where to begin? So, number one, along with the SEC, the CFTC busted 2 digital asset companies for off-exchange trading. 2, they had their first ever pandemic-related enforcement action, which was a Forex trader in Florida claiming to have a way to profit off of coronavirus. 3, they invalidated the CPO exemption registrations of 17 foreign operators. This means those operators need to register as a CPO or stop operating commodity pools in the United States. 4, they finalized their 2020 through 2024 strategic plans. 5, they issued an interim final rule amending margin requirements for swap participants where there is no prudential regulator. This and other swap margin related stuff will be discussed at the meeting next week. And finally, they will be hosting a series of virtual fintech events over the remainder of the summer. And that leads nicely into our topic of the week, which is tech. Everybody is teching up from reg tech to soup tech to insure tech to health tech. This week, the CFPB, the FDIC, the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, and the OCC are all talking tech. The CFPB is hosting tech sprints to reduce regulatory burden and help improve consumer understanding of financial services. The FDIC issued a report discussing its own implementation of its enterprise risk management system. For those of you who don't know, ERM is a buzzword that lots of organizations today are using to describing the spectrum of internal and external risks and how the organization is going to go about managing them. The National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence is hosting a meeting to discuss the advancement of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and associated technologies for the purposes of national security. Finally, the OCC is reviewing all of its regulations on bank digital activities to ensure that its regulations continue to evolve with developments in the industry. For those of you following AML KYC, FinCEN issued an advisory to alert financial institutions of imposter scams and money mule schemes, some of which have been caught during the pandemic and are described at length in the report. The New York Department of Financial Services fined Deutsche Bank $150 million for looking away at Jeffrey Epstein's suspicious cash transactions. For those of you following cannabis, Indiana had criminalized smokable hemp, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit said the injunction was too broad. The case is going back to the lower courts for more proceedings. Meanwhile, in Michigan, they passed the Industrial Hemp Growers Act, which requires the Michigan Department of Agricultural and Rural Development to develop and operate an industrial hemp program. For those of you following climate issues, a whole host of regulators are coming together for the Environmental Technologies Trade Advisory Committee open meeting on July 21st. The FDIC is revising rules around bank branches. The goal is to reduce regulatory burden, so the agency said that there's no longer a requirement when you're registering a branch to make statements associated with the National Historic Preservation Act or the National Environmental Policy Act. In 2010, the SEC issued interpretive guidance about the disclosure of climate-related risks. The guidance was useful, but it didn't require disclosure of the specific company's major facilities that could be at risk relative to climate change. A number of investors wrote a letter to the SEC this week asking them to insist upon this disclosure so that they could manage and price physical climate risks appropriately. Given the SEC's current focus on deregulation, I don't imagine this would be granted with this administration. That said, one of the SEC commissioners gave a speech at the Society for Corporate Governance National Conference and mentioned that requiring ESG disclosures did make sense for the SEC since the disclosures could help investors make better decisions. And the states continue to rally together in regional efforts. Virginia is the latest to announce that it is becoming a member of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, a collaborative effort among the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states to combat climate change. Now, for those of you following crypto, you've heard about the G20 or the G8, but have you ever heard of the J5? It's the Joint Chiefs of Global Tax Enforcement. It includes Australia, Canada, Holland, UK, and our very own IRS. This organization issued a report reflecting on the last 2 years of hunting global tax cheats, especially in the area of virtual currency. Don't mess with the Texas State Securities Board round, 16? They busted 2 more crypto trading platforms for selling unregistered securities. Hey, America! Texas is one of the only states that says if you're registered with the federal authorities, you still need to register with Texas. They make a lot of money finding you. So if you have any Texas investors or customers, go ask your compliance officer if you're actually registered in Texas. For those of you following the LIBOR transition, ARRC is announcing a SOFR summer series, which is a bunch of live stream events following on the heels of a document they just released about their new transition aid for SOFR adoption. For those of you following privacy, the FTC busted another company for violations of the US-EU Privacy Shield framework. And they're hosting a virtual workshop to get input on their proposed changes to the Gramm-Leach-Bliley's Act Safeguards Rule, which is essentially the data privacy rule for financial institutions in the United States. For those of you following social justice, the Office of Inspector General is an entire agency dedicated to reviewing misconduct in FDIC programs. I guess they caught something because this week they produced a report saying that the FDIC had not established an adequate sexual harassment prevention program. Across the states, as there have been over the last few weeks, there were many police reform proposals as well as data collection requests on the use of force. Atlanta, still struggling with racial reform issues, revised its city policy so police are required to give a verbal warning before they use deadly force. Virginia passed some sweeping gun legislation, including the one handgun a month policy, meaning that you can't buy more than one handgun per month if you live in Virginia. Michigan's governor signed an executive directive to improve equity across the state's healthcare system. And in the lighter fight for social justice, Ohio is very concerned about concert goers being ripped off because of canceled shows. They've been getting the word out that Ohio's consumer complaints laws are in place to help. For those of you watching SROs, we reported earlier on CME's concern about farmers, and apparently the Farmer Sentiment Index improved for the second month in a row, rebounding from sharp declines in March and April. Freddie Mac's mortgage survey report said yet again this week, mortgages hit an all-time record low. Meanwhile, Fannie Mae's home purchase sentiment index went up as consumers are reporting a significantly more positive view of home buying and home selling conditions, as well as greater optimism regarding home price appreciation. And since we're on Freddie and Fannie, the CFPB issued 2 notices of proposed rulemaking to address the impending expiration of the GSE patch. The patch is scheduled to expire on January of 2021 or when Fannie and Freddie exit conservatorship, whichever comes first. This does include changes to the official definition of qualified mortgage, so be sure to take a look. FINRA has been pushing lately to get a rule change in to address broker-dealers with a significant history of misconduct. They are on amendment number 1 at this point, and the SEC is asking for comments. Finally, the Fixed Income Clearing Corporation has a proposed rule change to provide for passive acknowledgement, which I thought was kind of interesting. If you're silent about your settlement instructions, they're going to assume it's a funds-only cash settlement. In other federal news worth noting, the Department of Labor has put out some changes to ERISA definitions. As you would expect from this administration, they are carving out exemptions from the conflict of interest rules for advisors. Also, the SEC is changing the reporting threshold for institutional investment managers from $100 million to $3.5 billion. They say it's to reflect changes in over the last 45 years, which makes sense, but there are a number of commissioners speaking out saying that the SEC has been rolling back so many disclosures, it is really getting to be to the point that it's at the detriment of investors. And in interesting state news, Ohio is offering more unemployment to its residents even after federal employment runs out. This is an interesting juxtaposition compared to Idaho that is paying people to get off unemployment. And Tennessee is declaring 2 upcoming sales tax holidays for its residents. Finally, for my dad, who grew up in Ohio and is turning 85 next month, the Idaho governor has open positions for the Economic Advisory Council. Uncle Max or Aunt Joan, maybe? Also, Dad, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has deemed the control panels for Alfa Romeos to be non-compliant with U.S. rules. But don't worry, it's only Alphas built 2004 or later, so you're fine. That's it this week for Regulator's U.S. Alerts. Join us every Wednesday morning on LinkedIn. Regulator's U.S. Alerts is the #1 source of rules and announcements from every agency in the United States. Click to subscribe to our weekly roundup of U.S. Alerts, follow us on LinkedIn, and visit us at www.regulatorx.ai.